And I'm really, really hoping that this will help guide you to take on more challenges in your life, right? Because that's really all we wanted to do, is create some awareness, to know that there are 4 different types of stress, to identify those 4 types of stress so that you can identify it in your own life and say, this is the situation that I'm sitting in. Maybe I should get away from this because it's impacting my health. And as an added benefit, if I start focusing on looking at stress from a different perspective, in the short-term stress or the acute stress, this could actually impact my health in a positive light. It could actually help you live longer. It really could, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome to the RLT podcast, where we share some real-life tools, tips, and tricks to help you not only discover, but also reach your ultimate goals. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Real Life Tips podcast, episode number 37. I'm your host, Mono.
You're joined by Leon as usual, and tonight, like no other, we're going to bring you some valuable information. This is actually a topic that's quite interesting because I think we all have a specific perception about this, and tonight we're going to once again, to try and keep it interesting and not just talk about what everyone's talking about, just challenge the status quo a little bit. And I might as well just lead it in. I'm already like halfway there. We're going to talk about, stress, man. Stress levels. Yeah. I'm sure we've hit on the topic of stress throughout different conversations in different episodes so far. But tonight we're actually going to talk about the effect of stress. But can you believe that there's something like good stress?
Yeah.
There is definitely something called good stress. They actually call it eustress. And that's basically considered good stress. It's something that can benefit you, all right? I'm not just going to give away the entire episode right now of what that might be. You can start thinking about it and start chewing on it a little bit. But obviously, we all know that stress is bad. We all know what causes it and why it's there and so on. And we all try and manage stress on different levels, depending on your lifestyle, depending on your health, maybe family situations, etc. All different factors cause stress in life. Some of the stress I found, especially in the last couple of years now, with like this extreme case of, a world pandemic and economic climates that are worsening. Everything in the world just seems so bad and gloomy, that a lot of it can actually build you a little bit. It builds resilience. It makes you stronger because you're constantly facing opposition. And that opposition is stressful, but it's the whole virtue of why you go to exercise. Your muscle won't get stronger just by moving your arm around. But as soon as you put resistance in your hand, so a weight or a dumbbell or a barbell or whatever, and if you see what I look like, I'm no expert, but that resistance builds the muscle, and it's the same with stress. I think the more stress you have, the better you become at coping with it. And some of that stress could actually be really, really good for you. So that's pretty much what we're going to talk about. This is something very interesting. I think it's valuable for a lot of people because it takes away the hate relationship with stress and changes it to a love-hate. At least a 50-50.
Yeah.
Super stoked about this.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to be so interesting because we're going to have a look at it and we're going to try and unpack good stress versus bad stress. We all are quite accustomed to and familiar with bad stress because that's pretty much life. The stress that we're dealing with on a daily basis, right? Yeah, it's called life. It's called Monday mornings. That's why we release these episodes to try and help you through the weekly stress ahead, right? But we're also going to look into good stress and really unpack that and see what is good stress and what makes up this term good stress and what exactly do we mean by the word good? Does that mean that it has positive impacts on your mental health or physical health? And we're really going to deep dive into it. But what we're also going to do is we're going to look at it from the 4 different types of stress. So there are 4 different types of stress or classifications of stress. It's where the penny dropped and I said to myself, and I was like, I always saw stress as this one, unified
Very
sort of
one-dimensional
force that's in my life. Yeah, exactly. But I never really knew that there were different degrees of stress, and that could be split up into two different parts, good stress versus bad stress. So the 4 different types of stress that we're going to cover tonight, starting off with some really bad stresses, and we're going to talk a little bit more about chronic stress is the first one, and the second one is relentless stress. And then leaning more into short-term stress is intense stress and acute stress, the healthy stress, right? So we'll touch on each and every one of those 4 points here tonight. And as always, we can promise you that by the end of this episode, you'll know exactly what good stress is and how you can bring more of that into your life by means of us sharing real life action steps or real life action tips that you can start applying to your life. And as usual, we'll see what the research says, what science says. And there's so many studies that have gone into this. We're going to have a look at the overall outcome and the conclusiveness of those studies to see if that really is true and if it can impact your life and how can it impact your life and how can you actually start enforcing that. So extremely stoked to be deep diving into this stress topic because, again, we're nearing the end of the year and we know that we have to prep ourselves. We have to armor up and get ready because we're going into the crazy season where everything in business just crashes and everyone's like pushing to get the numbers out and get the final numbers in. Everyone's pushing to finish up all of their work before they hit the holiday seasons and everything, no matter where you are in the globe. So I think it's a good time for us to actually target and tackle this topic.
Yeah,
tonight.
no, absolutely. I think you're quite right. It's something to talk about. I think as we are kind of nearing a specific pivotal point of this pandemic and all the stress that just that alone brings, it's time to actually confront stress a little bit, in my opinion, and see what it's all about. I think for a lot of people, it's been almost like a couple of seasons now of stressful situations and life that's very uncertain and stuff. And obviously, I mean, we're talking about the pandemic being a strong driving force behind a lot of things that's been happening to people, and the stress that they've been experiencing in their lives are kind of rooted in this uncertainty that comes with the pandemic. But, we're at that point now where obviously there's a lot of rollout of vaccine happening. So we're at that like turning point. I think one of the major turning points, definitely not at the end. I don't think the end will happen in the next. I don't even think the end of COVID will happen in my lifetime, to be honest. I think it's going to always be there. But we're definitely at a turning point where it's getting better, I think, for most of the world. And it's time to take stock and look at the different types of stresses that we've now all felt. I don't think there was anyone immune to stress throughout the last, let's call it 18 months. Yeah. 16 to 18 months. And to start taking stock of the types of stress. And that's why, I mean, you started very clearly by stating there's different types of stress. To me, I never really thought of it like that. To me, stress was just stress. Stress is this uncomfortable pit in your stomach feeling that you have about everything, like everything uncertain, everything that's out of control, everything that you can't manage. I didn't know that you would have necessarily good stress, bad stress, acute stress, long-term stress, whatever you want to call it. There's different levels and degrees of stress. And as soon, again, as you can, if you can label the stuff and you can understand what is underlying in each type of stress, that already equips you once again with the tools and hopefully some research and information that's going to help you deal with it better. So for me personally, I'm a little bit of I get stressed out like quite easily. As soon as anything starts challenging my certainties, like the things that I am certain about, like health that just ticks over, luckily for me, like it just keeps going and there's nothing really going bad for us, and finances and work and those kind of things. As soon as anything starts taking a grip of those things in my life, I feel super out of control and I lose almost myself a little bit with the stress, and the stress really overpowers me at that point, to the point where it's so deadening and so loud, if you'd like, that I start not really living anymore. I actually just become like a zombie of of stress until hopefully it just ends, like the situation resolves itself at some point. And that is something that's extremely toxic. Now, the interesting thing about tonight, and what I'm trying to get to, the interesting thing about tonight's discussion around stress and good stress, bad stress, different types of levels of bad stress, now that I can actually look at those situations that cause this overbearing level of stress in my life, and I can go and put a pin and a specific tag, or let's say a degree of stress label on each matter in my life that was bringing the stress, suddenly I feel a little bit more control. It's weird, I know, it's odd, but as soon as I know, okay, but that part is only an acute problem because that is going to be resolved in a month or so. This part with the pandemic, yes, that's very uncertain. So that's definitely something I can't do much about. I need to just like take my foot, but it doesn't feel like this cluster of stress anymore. That's just one big issue.
Yeah.
There's degrees of stress in there. There's some of it that's the lights at the end of the tunnel, some of it. So it doesn't feel so overbearing anymore. And that, I think, is what's super important, or that was like absolutely interesting for me researching this, is to understand that there's levels of stress, and stress doesn't just come in one form like I always thought it does. It feels the same in the moment. I think it kind of feels the same to me, at least, like that.
Yeah, feels similar. Yeah,
exactly. But they have varying degrees of longevity.
Yeah, and like. I think what's interesting that you mentioned there as well is the fact that you're uncomfortable with anything that sort of challenges your certainty. And that makes a lot of sense, because we've had this chat in the past as well, where you've mentioned time and time again that you're uncomfortable with change, and it's still something that you're trying to
bit of a control
sort
freak.
of fix. Yeah, exactly, right. So I think it becomes quite apparent that there might be a genetic component in this as well. Maybe that's something that you've inherited. Maybe that's something that's sort of just the way that you've been programmed or coded. And others are just so much more adaptable to life and change of circumstance and everything as well, and resilient. And I think it really just comes back down to resilience. But there's also a form of emotional flexibility that's also tying into that, and mental adaptability. And I feel that a lot of people might either have this or might not have it, and would have to actually learn how to not cope better with stress, but how to cope better with change and things that they're uncomfortable with as well, as point number one. The other thing that I actually do want to point out as well, and I think this is quite apparent, is the fact that stress is unavoidable. I mean, this is something that we all know. No matter what you do, you can, like, obviously we're all uncomfortable with stress to some degree, even those people who are more adaptable than others, even those people who are more comfortable with change than others, and who are more resilient. But stress is unavoidable. And at the end of the day, for those people who are less resilient, they try and steer away from stress. And the point that we want to address here tonight, right now, right here, is I really want to deep dive into the fact that as much as you try and stay clear from stress, shouldn't we turn around and start looking at stress in a different way? Changing our perception or perspective of what stress is and how and what an impact it could have on your life, right? And I think let's quickly take it from the 4 different types of stress, right? So I mentioned that there are 4 types, which is chronic stress, and then the second one is relentless stress. And look, chronic stress is typically defined as burnout, right? So this is prolonged stress that has continued for such a long time that it's really just become part of who you are. And I know a couple of, not a lot of people, but I know a couple of people in my own personal life who are like this, and they are just stressed out by nature. Like anything that it's small trigger
very dysfunctional,
will just flip them completely. They'll just go crazy, and they'll start stressing out about anything.
Keep it together.
Exactly, right. So that's sort of chronic stress, right? And we're going to touch a little bit more on what the research says about chronic stress and how bad this is for you. But if we have a look at the second one, which is relentless stress, this is stress that prolongs over months or years, right? And we're going to work this back to, so we're talking about long-term stress now. And long-term stress, the bottom line is not good for your health, is not good for you as a person. And I mean, you can imagine, like, if you had to start drinking alcohol on a regular basis and you do that for a short period of time and then you stop and then you start again, obviously that's not going to have a massive impact on your health. It could compound over many years or decades. But if you compare that to a person who drinks every single day for 20 years, the amount of impact that has on his health or her health, obviously there's a massive, massive difference there. And that's sort of the scale that we're looking at here. And that's sort of the bad stress that we want to steer clear from. Now, Leon, I'm interested at looking at the research on bad stress at this stage, and then we'll switch it over to good stress. Can you share with us what does the research say? What sort of effect does bad stress have on us? Does it impact our health, and to what extent?
Yeah, so the weird thing is that, and this is probably where I might scare a lot of people, but it's important that we take this a lot more seriously, because it's almost like I want to let people know that the chronic stresses, all right, so the stress that you kind of feel permanently, if you can find a way to see how that stress maybe fits in a different bucket, so maybe rather long-term than chronic, or maybe even just various types of acute stresses that you perceive as one big chronic stress, it's really going to serve you well as far as health is concerned. When it comes to the health implications of chronic and long-term stress, and we're talking about long-term in the sense of several years or decades of stress, from an emotional perspective, obviously these people are very, very almost like fragile and frustrated and agitated permanently, and moody, for the lack of just like a better word. They're just very overwhelmed, and they lose control, and they never seem like they've got their stuff together, and that I know a lot of people that's like that. I've seen myself like that, but from more like acute stresses, or maybe semi long-term stress factors, maybe not as long as what they are talking about here. But it's literally emotionally very depleting. It kind of floors you completely to the level where you're struggling so much with just keeping stuff together that anything just makes you flip completely. Yeah. And then you become very melodramatic, or you can become very unreasonable or irrational. And those are definitely not things that you want to be. When it comes to physical symptoms, and I have had every single one of these symptoms happen to me. I think I experienced the physical symptoms very early on, and that's how I usually know that I'm under a major amount of stress. The first thing is low energy. I think stress takes so much out of your metabolism that you just drain through buckets of energy so fast. And I actually don't know if I knew this beforehand.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so low energy is one of the first and foremost physical symptoms of stress. Headaches, obviously. All right, I'm very familiar with those. I used to pop way too much headache pills back in my days. Upset stomachs, including diarrhea, constipation, nausea. There's a few interesting ones here. We just spoke about insomnia, right? Stress can bring on insomnia. And I think we kind of knew this, because I can see how stress will make you overthink of a lot of stuff, and how that can keep you up. And I think even without thinking about stressful stuff, if you are permanently under stress, you're going to have a tough time getting some good sleep.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, because the more you think about something, the more, and we've touched a little bit on this, and I think this was in the beginning of our episodes, one of our first episodes, is the fact that you constantly rethink things from the previous day. I think it attributes it to about like 70% of your thoughts are from yesterday or the day before, right? So that's why it's so important to focus on your mindset. That's why we have the podcast, number one. But number two, what happens now is we're talking about chronic stress, right? So over a prolonged period of time. So you're sort of burning that stress into your subconscious. And even when you're not thinking about that in your conscious mind, it's still sitting in your subconscious. So now you struggle to fall asleep even when you're not thinking about your problems and your stresses. So yeah, no, I think it does make a lot of sense.
That makes a ton of sense, actually. Yeah, thinking about it like that. I think lastly, so one of the other physical, there's a ton of physical symptoms, but the ones that I think we all can relate to, stress has a very big impact on your immune system. Because again, your body is actually trying to fight the stress itself. So by doing that, it's taking away some of your immunity to fight it off. And, because your metabolism is also at a heightened level, you're not actually creating enough antibodies to fight off colds and infections and flu and those kind of things. So you'll actually be more prone to the normal run-of-the-mill type flus and things like that. So that's also something to take into consideration. And I think, there's also a lot of cognitive and behavioral symptoms. I think, we all can agree that, when you are stressed, you're permanently like in a state of worry and uncertainty.
Yeah.
That's me, definitely. Like, that's how I experience stresses. I'm usually permanently racing my thoughts and trying to figure out how can I resolve this. What walls can I build so that I don't come tumbling down and everything comes down with it? I have really bad ability to focus when I'm like that as well, which now I see is one of the key symptoms as well. The behavior is one of the difficult ones to kind of curb as well, because you'll actually start experiencing problems with your appetite. So either not eating or eating too much. It's not just one or the other.
Yeah.
It could be, that you are experiencing one or the other. In my case, it was definitely eating too much, man.
Stress eating, man. There's a reason that there's a term for it, man. Stress eating. And there's a reason that people who quit smoking get fat. Well, apparently that's what they say. I mean, but so many people have told me that that's true, because
100%.
nicotine helps calm you down. And when you get off that nicotine, obviously you don't have a coping mechanism. And then you start eating more, and that sort of leads into this death spiral of gaining weight as well. That's
so funny that you say that. That brings it full circle, because nicotine, cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, those are other behavioral symptoms of stress. If you replace one of those, you're going to find another one to replace it with. So either you're going to be eating too much and smoking, or you're going to do one or the other. And if one goes, the other's going to take the fall.
If you're anything like me, I was smoking and eating a ton as well, just to cope with the stress. But that actually does bring up a very interesting point, because I think especially now that we're focused on bad stress, just before we move into good stress, right? We're talking about chronic and long-term stress, so and relentless stress, which typically is experienced over months or years, right? And now what happens with that as well is you need to break free from that. And as much as you try and run away from that stress, remember in the beginning I said that
it's your shadow. It's going to follow you everywhere.
We don't want to deal with stress, man. We really don't. So what we do is we find these coping mechanisms, and I've been there. Trust me, I've been there. Maybe not chronic stress, but I've definitely experienced relentless stress, which lasted months or years. I can't say years, maybe a year at most, but I've experienced this in the past. And now what happens is you start finding these coping mechanisms because you don't want to deal with that stress, because you kind of feel like you just don't want it around anymore. You just want to forget about your problems and stuff. And then that's when you start developing these crazy habits where you go out and club on weekends and stuff. Like, that's obviously when I was a kid still and younger, and now I hate clubbing. But now you find other coping mechanisms. I mean, like Netflix is there, and you're like constantly streaming stuff, or you're constantly on YouTube, or you're constantly playing games, or you're constantly...
anything that takes you out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you're trying to just like completely...
crutches.
Exactly. And that's an extremely important point, is to understand that we cannot get away from stress. And tonight, I don't want to really come in and say, look, we're the stress experts, because we're not, right? What I really want to come in and say is that let's change the perspective that we have in general of stress, because we all typically perceive stress as just this one entity or this one type of stress. But knowing that there are 4 different types of stress out there, and knowing that those can be broken up into good stress versus bad stress, and knowing most importantly that you shouldn't always run away from stress sometimes you should actually flip it on its head and say, I'm going to embrace stress. And that's what we want to talk about going into good stress as well.
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing. You just mentioned the right word there is running away from it. So actually stress comes from the old lizard brain. I forget the actual terminology for it, but it's obviously frequently referred to as the lizard brain, like our very early, like, Homo sapien brain. And it links to the flight or fight response. Now, most of the good stresses are going to be stresses that you should absolutely fight. And by fighting them, you obviously come out so triumphant that you actually grow from it. All right.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, where we need to focus on for the remainder of this episode, is just how to use good stress to actually improve yourself and grow yourself and find achievement in overcoming stressful and difficult situations.
Yeah.
So I actually want to start with like a really, really easy story that's going to make most people understand what we talk about when we talk about good stress. All right. So assume you are back. I wish this was real, actually, thinking about it now, but assume you were back 8 years old riding your first bike. And the first time you see a pothole in the road, lo and behold, you go through it, you fall down, and that now creates a sense of fear in you for that pothole. So the next time you go, you see the pothole, you at least now know what happens when that pothole strikes, and you steer clear from it, and you are able to actually get past that pothole. That's a stressful situation. It's acute, it's short term, but it can be good stress because it's actually teaching you the ability to prevent ever falling down that pothole again. Next time you climb on your bike, now it's raining as well, and there's a storm and there's lightning and whatever. This situation just got even far worse, but just from experience, and this is what it's going to come down to quite a bit with good stress. Through practicing stress almost like short-term stresses, if you can practice, and I think in our previous episode I spoke about winning frequently. Like if you just win, you build a lot of confidence, and then you can have that same situation far worse and still handle it appropriately. So now for this 8-year-old on his bike, he's been through a pothole once, fell down. Second and third time he was able to dodge it. The stress doesn't bother him anymore. Now the situation's even worse. It's raining outside, the gravel is slippery, whatever. He still at least knows from past experience, he thinks he's got it in him to still beat this thing. Because I've beaten it without the rain. Why should it be any different right now? And that's where good stress starts building on top of each other, and you eventually become like the Hulk of stress. You know, you can pretty much take on anything. And the more you practice like these little small stresses, the better you are going to be able to evolve and eventually fight off the big form of that same stress, which could then, if you never had the practice of that first stressor, could put you into like a proper acute sense of stress, where now you've got the experience on how to battle and how to fight the stress instead of flight, and actually, beat that stress, overcome it, and be way, way stronger at the end of the day.
I love that, and I love that analogy. I think that's amazing because I think it all comes down to, it's a skill, right? If you're not born with a talent of being extremely resilient, right? If you're not born with it, you can learn that. It's a skill that you can learn. You can learn 100%. How to overcome it, so you can learn how to be more resilient. And that's the key thing there. That's interesting. So we've covered 2 out of the 4 types of stress, right? Chronic stress and relentless stress. And now moving into good stress, which is number 3, intense stress. And intense stress is more short-term than relentless stress, which relentless stress typically lasts months or years. Intense stress only lasts about 3 to 5 weeks. So this is stress that you've experienced over a period of about 3 to 5 weeks. Still a little bit prolonged, but more in the short term. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about acute stress, which is the healthy stress, the extreme good stress. All right. And I think the most interesting part of this is the fact that there is a thing such as good stress. I never knew this I think I sort of knew it, but I wasn't aware of it. You know what I'm saying? Because I've experienced this in so many cases. And let me give you a good example of good stress. And the penny just dropped for me here. And I was like, you're so right. There is a thing such as good stress. And I shouldn't look at stress as this extreme bad thing. I should actually embrace stressful situations at times because it would make me a better person. To give you an example, a couple of times I've been faced with this. Leon, we worked together closely for quite a long time as well. And we worked so closely together that Leon actually pulled me into meetings 15 or 20 minutes before the meeting. He'll let me know, listen, there's a meeting coming up. And I'm like, dude, okay, it sounds good. I'm in. But what are we talking about? What are we presenting? What are we selling? What's happening, you know? And he's like, no, we'll figure it out. Like, let's just first meet the people and all that stuff.
Let's just go again. But it comes down to my analogy. You know, I've been there. I've seen the potholes. I've dodged them a few times. I'm confident we can do it again, you know?
All right. Before I continue with that story, but this is the difference between you and me, right? Is because you are trained in this and I'm the opposite of this. I flip out, dude. Like I stress myself out to a T, and I first have this complaining session and saying that no, there's not enough time for me to prep and all that stuff. And then you know what? I get onto the meeting, and within 5 minutes in that meeting, I'm still busy building presentations in the background. And before the introductions are even done, I'm ready and I'm set and I'll go and I absolutely nail those meetings,
and
right?
Nail it.
I nail it.
Exactly.
So that's the sort of good stress that we're talking about. And I never really realized, why is it that I could, stress about an upcoming event for 3 weeks. You've got this massive event or this massive thing that you've got planned, a party. Maybe you've planned a party for your friend. Maybe it's a bachelor's party or bachelorette or something, and you're just stressing yourself out. Or maybe it's your wedding, or it's your honeymoon, or it's your own birthday party, and you don't know who's going to come, who's not going to come. Those things stress you out so much that eventually it turns into this intense stress, which makes you put in more effort to ensure that you've got all of your bases covered, right? But in the short term, if somebody tells you that you have to get something done this afternoon, this acute stress kicks in. And all of a sudden, you forget about time, you forget about everything, all of your doubts, all of your insecurities, and you just get the job done. And that's what we're talking about when we say good stress. Now, what I really want to emphasize here is that we're changing our perspective of stress, right? It's as opposed to looking at stress as always this bad thing, can we not then look at stress and say, sometimes if I'm faced with these stressful situations, I should just embrace it. I shouldn't fight against it and then say, you know what, it's been such a stressful week. It's been crazy. I just had these back-to-back meetings and all those things. Those things have an extreme good impact on your performance, number one. And then number two, Leon, I'm going to hand it over to you again. What does the research say? Because I read somewhere in a book, and I want to confirm this statement, is that acute stress has little to no effect on our health and well-being. And actually, it can even have health benefits. Now, tell me a little bit more about that. Is there research that can prove that statement? Because I want to know, what health benefits is there in acute stress? Because I can't imagine stress benefiting my health. I always saw it as something detracting from my health.
Yeah, so that's actually super interesting. So the overwhelming and overbearing research on stress, and especially because it's got to do with the bad stresses like chronic stress, long-term stress, indicates that, stress is many times associated with like increased biological aging and suppression of your cardiovascular system and your heart and things like that. So, a lot of people that have had prolonged exposure to stress can suffer from heart disease, and there's usually like maybe some depression or anxiety disorder and things like that. But on the flip side, because stress works on your fight or flight response, your reptilian brain, did I call it lizard brain earlier?
Same thing, man.
I just figured
I just realized that
I meant
okay, but
I meant
in our defense, we're Afrikaans boertjies, so English is our second language.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. You can just edit it out, Mr. Marley. Yeah,
gonna
sorry,
leave it
I
in.
meant reptilian brain. Jeez, man. Uh, all right, so not our lizard brain, the reptilian brain. Maybe some people refer to it, especially Afrikaans people, the lizard brain. But anyways, fight or flight. So this is the exact same. If you look at nature, right, a lion will never ever be able to like catch a gazelle if there was no fight or flight response. Nor would the gazelle ever have a chance to run away. And hopefully like 1 out of 2 times have a 50-50 chance of getting away from a lion if there was no fight or flight response within the gazelle. That's why you would go to a national park and you'll see full-grown and half-grown gazelles. Some of them made it to like that age of flight response, man, winning every time. Otherwise, they would all just be youngsters. Think about it.
Yeah.
That is a bad example. But anyways, you get what I mean. So every time a gazelle went through that, like that point where he sees, okay, there's a lion chasing my ass down, they get away. They get older, they get stronger, they know what comes next time, and that's actually an improvement. So you see what I did there? Like I actually went somewhere with that story.
I love that. I was thinking like, where's this going? But I get you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the same for the lion. The lion, if he doesn't make his first kill, he'll just say, okay, cool, beat, I'm just going to now die. It's not working out. But actually you learn, you adapt. And the same thing goes for any stress that is of short-term value. So if it's something that you can learn from, because I think stress is many times a growth opportunity that could be missed if you just fold into a bunch and just take a whipping from the stress or the stressor. So what it boils down to, if you look at the actual research, it really does come down to this, that actually during this like short-term stresses that you have, this natural stress response, so your flight or fight response, will actually boost your protective immune system. It's going to make you more aware. It's going to make you super vigilant at that point in time. And again, because these are usually short-term challenges, actually, if you just like play around with wording a little bit, you're going to learn from it. So you're actually going to become better at something. Whatever the stressor is causing, if you overcome it, you are improving in that part in your life. If that happens again, it won't get you down. So there's 100% so much good benefit to it. And because it's not prolonged, it doesn't have that side effect of working on your, getting chance to take hold into your cardiovascular system, your heart, your metabolism, your concentration levels, your focus, all that kind of stuff. It really happens in such a short spurt that there's more other chemicals in your brain that's actually preventing it from causing any harm, and in fact giving you such an acute awareness of the situation and a keen sense of what's going on in your surroundings. You almost get like eagle vision in that short term of stress. You just mentioned when I put you in a spot and said, listen, we've got 15 minutes to present 20 slides to a very big customer. I bet you were laser focused for that 15 minutes, and you performed at a level that you probably never knew you had.
Yeah, it's like adrenaline kicks in and just takes over.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where the health benefit comes in. If you do that frequently enough, you become like invincible to the small stresses in life. And again, I like to talk about practicing these things. The more you get into these situations, the better you become. And eventually you're just like a master of like small stressful things just don't faze you, and you just knock them out the park like they're nothing.
I love that.
And when
That's
you combine,
awesome,
if you combine small stressful things, you can start taking on heavier, big, stressful things, you know, and maybe, I don't know, like make very big leap of faith, good judgment calls on starting a business, or, you know, something that you would probably never have the guts to do. You'll now, through your experience and going through several things and having won a lot of battles and having that under your belt, you'll have a lot more confidence to go ahead and try things that would like freak you out a year ago.
That makes so much sense.
And that's important.
That makes so much sense. And I'm really glad that you shared that and you actually proved that point, because I really didn't understand what people meant or what the specific author meant. And I think I read this in the book Stress Code. If you guys are interested in having a look at that, extremely good book.
Great book.
I think it's a local South African book. So for the US folk, unfortunately, I don't know.
Can get it on takealot.com.
Order it somewhere else. Anyway, but the point is, like, it's really good to know that that's a proven concept. I really wanted to understand what sort of health benefits lay within that as well. Extremely good, Leon. I think it's time for the real life talk.
Isn't that Pinocchio? Or what song is that?
I don't know, but I love it for today. All right, guys. So just to quickly summarize, there are 4 types of stress, and 2 of them can really be classified as bad stresses, right? And 2 of them, the last 2, could be classified as good stress. So the 4 types of stress is, number 1, chronic stress, and this leads to burnout. Number 2, relentless stress, which typically lasts for months or years. And then number 3 is intense stress, which is typically stress that you've experienced over a period of about 3 to 5 weeks, can be classified as intense stress. And this sort of falls under the good stress, as well as then acute stress, which is the absolute healthy stress, right? So even intense stress, not great, but not extremely bad. It's sort of in the middle of the spectrum, but really focusing on the acute stress as well. Now, leading into the real life tips, Leon, for this episode, I definitely do have 2 main points that I do want to perhaps highlight out of this episode, as well as out of some personal experience as well. And the first one that I have is to try and relieve the bad stress that you have, right? So think about the chronic stress. Think about people in your life that are suffering, and it's sort of become part of their personality, right? They've just become these stressful beings where, like, the smallest things just trigger them and they just completely flip out, right? And think about ways that you can identify the bad stress in their life and see how you can assist them as well. But if you feel that you're leaning towards even just relentless stress, where you've been sitting in a stressful situation, maybe it's the job that you're in, maybe it's the car that you're driving and it keeps breaking down, think about ways to solve that for yourself and try and relieve that bad stress. At least if you can't solve it, try and sort of soften the blow, right? And what I mean by this is, if you have a look at it at an example in business, if you're an entrepreneur, what the most successful entrepreneurs do out there is they start their own processes. They figure out the system. They figure out each and every little nut and bolt to how their business is supposed to operate. And all of that is extremely stressful. But the moment that they've mastered that, they start automating. They start delegating a lot of the tasks to people that will be able to focus on that stress for them and sort of relieve that stress from them. And I think that's an extremely good tip, is to look at your own life, look at the bad stress that you have, look at the relentless stress or the intense stress, the stress that lasts for weeks or a month or months or years, and see how can you at least sort of try and solve those problems. If it's a car that's giving you problems, see if you can trade it in, see if you can find a new car that's going to give you less issues. You know, if it's the job that you're in, I don't know, yeah, get a bike. If it's the job that you're in, see if there's perhaps another position that you can go and shoot for in the company. Whatever the case is, that's my tip number 1. Tip number 2 is, I would say, and this I think I might steal from you. I'm not sure if you're probably going to head in the same direction then, but I would say yes to more stuff. Honestly, in the example that I gave where Leon came to me on short notice and this isn't just a one-time thing, this happened over and over again. I kind of just got used to it. And he pulled me into these meetings on 99.9, and I always said yes. And I always succeeded in those meetings. And the more I do some introspection, look at my own life, it's those things that happen on short notice that I said yes to, that I performed the best and that I grew the most out of. And this is something that you've just highlighted as well. Yeah. You grow from that, you learn from that, you learn that you can deal with your insecurities, or that you forget your insecurities entirely. And the more you do this, the more it becomes part of your character and your personality and who you are as a person. So those are my 2 tips. Leon, anything from your side?
Yeah, so you did 100% steal off of my notes.
I didn't even see your notes, dude, but I'm glad to know that we're on the same track.
Yeah, so no, I kind of want to echo what you just said. It comes down to, I think it would be, we should have a counter on the screen by now, but I think it would be the 5th time that I said in this episode that you need to practice at stress.
Yeah.
And getting good at stress. So you need to expose yourself to difficult scenarios and stuff that you would usually say no to. Get yourself out of your comfort zone and test yourself a little bit. You have to do those things if you want to progress. Not only is it going to make you better at dealing with that stress when it comes, it's also going to grow you to become a better person.
And it's also going to have
just
healthy
good benefits.
It's also going to have health benefits. So it's
100%.
Just, it's an all-around win.
It's an all-around win. And I'm not saying go and challenge yourself with stressful things that's bad for health. I'm talking about stuff that's not going to kill you, not going to make you lose your job. I'm not talking about being reckless. I'm talking about stressful things like your example of being put in a difficult spot of, let's quickly do a live presentation to a big crowd. I was super uncomfortable the first time I had to do that. Yeah. But the reason I actually said, yes, okay, I'll do it is because I presented to 20-seat crowds for 2 years before that.
Yeah.
If you just gave me, as a first glance, a 200-seat crowd, I would probably run for the hills and go cry in a corner somewhere.
Yeah.
But because I had that little bit of confidence from smaller wins leading up to that, I was still scared. Don't get me wrong, and I still stressed, but I did it and I overcome, and that's what it's all about. So yes, I think we echo the same there. I think the last tip, I only have 2 as well, because I think stress is something quite intuitive, and I think a lot of people know what to do and what not to do. But one of the things that I personally found myself doing is I'm sometimes my own worst enemy when it comes to stress. I pile too much stuff on my plate, and I tend to not manage my time very well. But you end up with so many things that are half done that you get stressed out about the fact that you're not delivering quality anymore. And that to me is stressful in and of itself. So time management is super important. If you are stressed just by virtue of there's too much going on in your life, see if you don't have a problem like me where you just suck with time management and putting things in correct order and having a good flow to your day, because then you can I could get through all the things I put on my plate, but I tend to kind of crash through it and get it all done, and some of it's great work and some of it I just don't feel comfortable putting my name always behind it, So that's a small, maybe a very specific one.
I love that. Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, those are the tips that I've got.
That's amazing, and I totally agree with you on that, Leon. Absolutely great stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. This is good stress versus bad stress, and I'm sure that we've given a new perspective to this, and I'm really, really hoping that this will help guide you to take on more challenges in your life, right? Because that's really all we wanted to do, is create some awareness, to know that there are 4 different types of stress, to identify those 4 types of stress so that you can identify it in your own life and say, this is the situation that I'm sitting in. Maybe I should get away from this because it's impacting my health. And as an added benefit, if I start focusing on looking at stress from a different perspective, in the short-term stress or the acute stress, this could actually impact my health in a positive light. It could actually help you live longer. It really could, which is pretty crazy. Yeah. So really happy that we covered this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, this is me signing off, Mono.
And I'm Leon, so thank you once again to getting this far in the episode. I actually have a little bit of new profound perspective on stress. So we'll be back next week as usual with another refreshing episode on something that we all are fighting or dealing with on our daily lives, and some tips on how to fix that and how to resolve that. So yeah, we're signing out. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Next time. Bye. What's up, guys and girls? If you've derived some great value from our show thus far, please take a second to rate and review us on the platform that you're tuned in on. This will really help us to grow the show and reach more and more people, to spread the positivity and change more and more lives. So it will literally just take you a second to rate and review us, and who knows, perhaps you could directly be responsible for changing someone's life today. We look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Until then, cheers.